Hi, I'm Susan Okamoto-Lade, and I'm the Dean of Multi-Ethnic and Wellness Programs. And I think one of the great things that is part of what I get to do at Seattle Pacific is to get to know students and get to know their stories and to find out how to support them. And I think sometimes when it comes to, especially the whole topic of undocumented Americans, that we think we have these images that pop into our mind of people at the border and, crossing the river, and not even being aware that there are students here at Seattle Pacific. Sometimes they are in active student leadership roles, they might be your classmates, but because of the fear of that it's not only their story, but it's their family stories, and the fear of what the ramifications could be, that they might not share that. Last year I had the privilege of getting to know our speaker, Gretchen Korb-Nice, because with the travel ban, there was a lot of uncertainty and fear among students. What does this mean? And will I be separated from my parents? And what about my sibling who's living in another state? And so another cool part of what I get to do is to see the resources in the community and how they come around, both on campus and in the community, come around that with care and expertise to support students. So that's how I got to know Gretchen Korb-Nice last year, in the context of her coming on campus to talk about what was happening with the travel ban and what were the implications, and also to meet with students who needed assistance outside of the classes or time investigating. So with that, thank you, Gretchen, for coming today. She's got a great story too.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming and spending your lunch hour, your break here with me. And it's such an honor to be, and sounds like an inaugural speaker for this fantastic new major that you have. I wish that I had had the opportunity to select this major when I was a student. This is just a combination, a marriage of so many amazing ideas and concepts, and it really seems like something that you can do an enormous amount of things with. So I'm excited for you all that you have this opportunity if you're declaring this as your major, and if you're not, maybe you're missing out. It sounds really great. My name's Gretchen, and I am an immigration attorney, and I was invited to come talk with you today about my journey from sitting in your spot. It feels like a long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago, where I was in the same spot you are, but in Boston, so on the other side of the country, and wondering what I was going to do with this thing called life, and feeling the burden of expectations, both that I put on myself and that others had put on me, around me, and kind of how I leveraged being able to attend university and leverage that to a place where I'm in a vocation. I do consider my work a vocation that I love, and I think is it's a gift to be able to do the work that I get to do. So I'm going to just share that journey with you. Your journey will be your own and completely different than mine, but I'm hopeful that when you're 43 and have lived some of life, that you can look back and reflect on your journey and are as grateful as I feel today that you have had the experiences that you've had. So hopefully I can be somewhat of an encouragement for you at the beginning of that journey. I have a roadmap. I was a teacher first before a lawyer, so I have this inability to avoid being a teacher. So this is what we're going to talk about today. I'll just, like I said, I'll talk a little bit about my own journey, and I have some of my own thoughts about vocation. Have you all talked about that word before today? Is that something that you've talked about? Okay, that's it's a word that kind of theology owned, but now kind of more mainstream America is latching onto. So I feel like it's a word that's evolved over time, but as I'm interested in your thoughts on it, but I have some of my own thoughts on vocation. And I'll talk with a little bit about, why immigration for me, why immigration law, how did I end up here? And for those of you who may be interested in immigration law, or if this seems like something that you'd like to just explore, I do have some entry points, some suggestions for how you can dabble or get involved or figure out if this is something that gets you excited. And then the last piece, just very briefly, and if we have time, I'll just kind of do a 101 of immigration law, just for those of you who are academically or politically or just socially interested in how does this all work, and we'll do that at the end. So first of all, I'm going to tell you my story and kind of my journey, and this is again, this is what my experience looked like, and I'm hopeful that by sharing my story, you have an opportunity to think about how your journey may be as kind of bumpy and unpredictable as my own. And that in some ways, that part of making you who you are is that if we planned everything out perfectly and followed the plan, right, then we're not allowing ourselves to be impacted by the people and the conversations and the situations that we find ourselves in. So sometimes it's bumpy. I studied in Oxford for my senior year, and so I wasn't finished with my coursework until the end of June. And all of my peers were finishing in May, and I was frantically worried about how I was going to get a job when everyone else was already applying for jobs that would be gone. So I started applying for jobs, and the first and only job that I applied for right away was a teaching job. Again, just the irony of saying, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do this, and I ended up in this teaching. I did end up teaching for a school called Landmark. So I was hired while still at Oxford, and I came back in a week or so later, started working at this school. And the school was for kids with dyslexia. So all of the students were pretty significantly dyslexic and had failed out of all of the public school systems. And so the public school systems were actually paying this exorbitant fee to send the kids to this private school that I taught at. And that experience gave me an opportunity to work one-on-one with students. All of the kids had tutorials, so this was familiar from my Oxford experience. Or they had classes, and the class sizes were maxed at 6. So for me, it was an impactful experience because I worked with students who were considered failures by their community and by the school districts from which they came from. And I got to see that they were smart, bright kids who hadn't been served well by an education system. And so through my years there, I just developed this deep love of teaching and of working with students who the society had given up on them. It was cheaper to send them away to a boarding school than it was to try to work within the school district with these kids. And honestly, families had given up on them too. I mean, these kids were between the ages of 9 and 18, were living full-time at school. So that, to me, that kind of opened my eyes to what it meant to advocate for one person. And advocating for that one kid, I was able to see over the years transformed that kid, which in turn transformed that kid's family and their ability to contribute to their community and to the greater community that I worked in, because we were filled with hope and we had a different perspective on what it meant to have a learning disability. So these were transformative years for me. Through that, I eventually moved to Seattle, and I started working with the Seattle School District as an administrator, working with kids who had reading disabilities. So I stayed in that kind of same area. But I started to feel frustrated with the lack of systemic problems that kind of kept putting kids who didn't fit in the mold properly, kept putting kids kind of off to the side. And it was frustrating to me that kids who I knew were bright and had the ability to move into a place of thriving were not given that opportunity because of a learning disability. So I decided that I wanted to try to figure out how to work within the legal system to address those needs, to address those issues, kind of the gaps with that my students were feeling, and that was in a lot of ways pushing my students down and not letting those students move out of that kind of stuck place. So I explored the kind of two options in town for legal training, and decided that legal training was more appealing to me than an administration of public policy degree, those are sort of the two options if you're interested in policy or law. And I decided I wanted more practical training. I had a degree in philosophy and English literature, so I was ready for something that I could apply directly to a job. So I decided I would like to go to a law school. And quickly within my, and I also was working, so I chose the law school because I didn't want to stop the practical work. I was loving my work. So I remained, I continued working and also attended law school. And I had kids in law school too, so it ended up not working out to do everything. So eventually I stopped working my third year of law school. But I also learned in law school that education is its own kind of legislative animal, and that law isn't the best way to impact the educational system. And that was really hard for me, because I had at that point dedicated my 10 years of my life to kids with learning disabilities, and wanted desperately to figure out how to make a systemic change. And what I learned was that lawyers engage with education through truancy, and that was not interesting to me at all. I didn't want to force kids to go to school. That wasn't why I wanted to go to law school. So at that point I was invested. I was invested in financially, emotionally. We'd made a lot of sacrifices as a family, so I was in law school. So I decided I'm going to take advantage of this. I took tax law, environmental law. Why not? I'm just going to learn about how to engage in my community. Took a bunch of just interesting law classes, and it was great. I think everyone should go to law school. I really do. It really is. I am a better citizen. I am more informed. I can read that contract. I don't do that for work ever, but it is a great training. It really, truly is. I mean, if somebody else would pay for it, everybody should do it, but you should not do it if you're not getting, if you're just interested in doing it without someone paying for it, because it is very expensive. So I decided I needed to explore some other things. And one of those things with tax and environmental law, one of those things that I explored was immigration law. And I had worked with lots of students from lots of different countries. And so I could find a way to be interested in that. And so I decided to take a class, and at the same time there was a clinic offered. And so at the same time I signed up to take this clinic, and the clinic meant that while learning about immigration law, I was at the same time going to be working with a client, and I would get to work with somebody who was applying for some sort of status in the United States. And the client whom I was asked to work with was a client who had been the victim of violence in the United States. But because she didn't have a visa and because she didn't have status here in the United States, she was afraid. She was afraid that if she reported the crime, she would get deported. Or that if she spoke out, then someone would find out that her kids were here. So she had all these vulnerabilities that were prohibiting her from speaking up for herself. And I was on board. I just thought that that was amazing work, and that I was honored to be able to help her navigate the law so that we could get her a visa. And she was able to eventually get a green card, and her kids have green cards, and they're on their way to becoming citizens now. So, but that experience of working, similar to the teaching experience of working with somebody who was starting in a place where they felt like all of the systems were kind of keeping them down and forcing them in a place where they couldn't move forward and couldn't participate in their community and couldn't feel safe with their family, and being able to help somebody move out of that was what energized me. And so at that point in my law school career, I thought, I can get behind this, and this is something that I could care deeply about. And so I continued for the rest of law school volunteering with an organization called Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. And while volunteering with them, I just became more and more excited about the ways in which the legal profession, the immigration legal profession, intersected with things that I care deeply about, and the way that I could potentially marry those two areas. And so I am not currently working in any area of education. I do miss it, and I love students, but I think, part of my journey is that, maybe there will be a time where that will re-enter my life, and that would be fun. But it's not currently. Right now, for the last 10 years, I've been focusing exclusively on immigration law, and that has been a joy for me. So that's my journey to now. And I said I would quickly talk about vocation. Just for me, again, you've heard me talk about some of the ways in which I have been motivated or energized by work and by the things that I pour myself into. And so I have thought about vocation, as an adult, and also as a student, a young student entering college, and then going through various universities. And one of the things that it can feel burdensome to me. It can feel like I've got to figure this out. There's some calling, and I need to figure out what that calling is. And I guess I don't know. I'm hoping that I'm not saying something contrary to what you've heard, but I don't know that there is a calling for all of us, except that there is something within each of you that you care deeply about, and that makes you feel connected to your community and to each other. And I think that if you can connect that to the work you do, to me, that's a vocation. And it may be like for me that it's not just one thing. For me, I still care deeply about education. I think every kid should have access to education. That's something, I think, a fundamental value that we share. And I also care deeply about our immigration community and about access to the justice system. Those are things that I also care deeply about. So I think that when I think of vocation, I think less about a calling and more about connecting who you are to the work that you do. So why immigration law? I think I've kind of walked us there, but hopefully you can see that my journey, my professional journey, my personal journey with the various experiences that I've had, and those things that I've grown to care deeply about, those have sort of ushered me into a place where I feel like this area of work, this profession, this vocation, is a place where I can pour myself and the things that I care deeply about into. I also know that it's a privilege, and I think that that's a piece that, we work through, that you're all here at a university. You have access to this amazing privilege of attending school and going to classes all day and learning and listening and thinking about big ideas. I know that there are others across the world your same age who will never have that opportunity. So what will you do with that privilege? That's a responsibility, I think, that you have, and I carry that. I know that when I talk with clients every day, I know that access to a legal education was an incredible privilege, and that the ability to do something that I care deeply about is also an incredible privilege. And so those are things that are also a responsibility. And then, of course, as I've talked about, for me, the work that I do is satisfying, it's challenging. Honestly, this last year and a half, 2 years, it's been more challenging than I really ever wanted it to be. And certainly there are times, once a week or so that I think I'd like to pour a cup of coffee at Starbucks. That's really good. I think that would be a great job for me. I think I'd do that well. It's too hot or too cold. I could manage that. So there are definitely days where I feel like it's too hard, it's too challenging. But again, kind of back to that privilege. I have the privilege of doing work I care about, and so I'm going to stay with it, even when it is so challenging. So I have a whole list of resources. If you're interested in immigration law, this is something you think you might want to dabble in or you want to learn more. Here, this One America, this is a real time, in a couple weeks, you could volunteer for a citizenship day. These are so fun. So fun. And they're in Seattle, October 27th and November 17th. Hundreds of people come through these clinics to apply to become U.S. citizens. It is, for people who, like I said, I've worked with some people for 10 years, this is the dream. They've been working so hard for this to become a U.S. citizen. So it is the happiest of days. It's so fun. And I would definitely recommend volunteering. Lots of students volunteer. If you know another language, you can actually be paired with somebody who's applying for citizenship, and you can journey through the whole day with them, which is really fun. So you can act as an interpreter. If you don't speak a language other than English, then there are lots of other things you can do. You can put information into forms, you can help screening. There are lots of things you can do. So One America, they have citizenship days twice a year, at least every year. So if it doesn't work out this year, just file it away for the future. Refugee Women's Alliance, these are all just organizations in this city that do great work. I know these organizations well. They all do great work, and they all support immigrants. And you don't have to be an immigration lawyer. Some of these things are, after school programs for kids. These are, driving somebody to an appointment, or, there are lots of different ways. And actually, most of these Catholic Community Services, for sure, and CARE, these two for sure have a volunteer website. So you can shop for what you're interested in and send an application. So that I was going to just share a little bit about the Immigration and Nationality Act, but I think we don't have time. And I wanted to walk you through this other quick activity. Can I just do one activity really fast? Okay. So this is the Immigration and Nationality Act. We have visas, just to this is super basic, but there are visas, and you need to have a visa in order to be able to permitted entry into the United States. Everybody has to have a visa to enter. Student visa, tourist visa, immigrant visa, worker visa, any type of visa. Congress determined that 470,000 people every year should get an immigrant visa. That means a visa that you can immigrate and live here in the US. And Congress in 1986, and not since then, voted on how many people, groups, how many visas go to each group of people. So there are 4 categories, like broad categories: family, employment, refugee, and diversity. Diversity visas are, we have less than 3% of our population that is from X country, so we're going to give some visas to that country. It's a diversity visa. So you cannot get a diversity visa if you're from India or Mexico. You know, there are lots of people here from some countries, so we're not offering diversity visas to those countries right now. Okay, so 1 minute with somebody beside you. What percentage of that number would you give to those 4 categories? Just talk amongst yourselves. Okay, I'm going to pull this all together just because we have, I think, 1 minute. So just raise your hand if you would give the largest percentage of those visas to family members of people who are currently living in the US. Okay, raise your hand if you would give the largest number or percentage of that number to people who are coming here for work. Okay, and what about people who are refugees? Look at you all. And then for diversity visas, what if you give the largest percentage? Okay, this is what Congress actually decided to do in 1986. So actually Congress decided to give 226,000 visas every year to people who currently have family in the US, and you can petition, but not for every family member, just for siblings, spouses, or parents, not grandparents, not aunts and uncles, not cousins, and children. Children are included. Employment-based visas, 140,000 a year. And refugees, we're really, these executive orders are kind of moving that number down. It used to be 110, then it went down to 50,000, and we just learned yesterday that next year it's going to be 30,000. So that number is going down every single year. And then diversity visas are remaining at 50,000 a year. So that's where, you know, as you can see that Congress made some decisions, right? So when we go back to that piece where I talked about my moral compass and the values that I have, those inform this, right? So Congress made some really, you know, thoughtful maybe decisions about what do we value here in the US. And this is what Congress decided that we value, that this country values. So that whether or not that, again, this was 1986, and Congress has not touched the numbers except for these because of our presidents with executive orders, but Congress has not touched these. So we, the people, the voting people of the United States, have not weighed in on this since 1986. Okay, so I think I have time for some questions, and we're not going to talk about all of the other things. I was going to talk about how long it takes to get to the United States. As you can see, some people, if you applied for a family member, this is how long you have to wait. If you applied in 2011, right now you get to actually bring that family member over. For people, these are for siblings. It takes 13 years to get here. It's a long time. That's because of how many visas we have. I was going to talk about refugees and asylees. We're not going to talk about that, and the unaccompanied minors. So these are things that I wanted to talk about, but I don't think we'll have time. But you know, these are things that I care deeply about, and we just maybe another time we can talk about that.